All right, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about binding and the differences between using MVVM and the code behind. And then kind of at the end, we'll see where like the real benefit of using binding with MVVM comes in, as opposed to just coding everything in the code behind. So the basic structure of the project is just a very simple view that I've already done. So we're just going to review it, and it's a very simple view of viewing some. You have a list of structure sets that you can select from, and then you have some that once you select that, it populates some other information. And so as you make changes, you have to update the other portions of your view. So you have like the selector item, like maybe a combo box, and then or like a list box or something like that. And then once you make a selection change, you want something to happen, right? So in order to update other portions of your view, or even other views, like if you're developing something where you have multiple views and you're trying to communicate, that's where like the ease of using Prism comes in. But anyway, when you make a change, you have to be able to update, and so you have to link the two, whether it's with events or whatever. So in this video, we're going to talk about so that's the basic structure of the project. And then we're just going to talk about some basics of creating a view. We won't really get into the XAML or anything. We'll kind of go through it, but these are just some basic elements that you can use. And you'll see them as we're going through it. But I realize we've never really gone into that. But there's tons of really good videos on creating views and that sort of thing. And then we're going to talk about binding, and with binding comes things like INotifyPropertyChanged and using things like Prism. So just a little bit about binding. So you're going to use binding more so, at least from my experience, when I'm trying to use like an MVVM structure, right? So I've got views, view models, and the data. And the reason that that's beneficial is when you want to separate the three, right? So when you have all of your logic and your code behind, so when you create a view, let me just show you really quickly. So, and we'll get more into this, but so we have this view, this code behind view. So this is like an example of what your view might look like, or at least what this view looks like. So we have a section up here for a title, and then we have these available structure sets. Once that selection is made, then it populates this selected structure set ID, but then it also populates this list of structures. And again, this is just dummy data from another project that I've made to create some like fake data with some they're not like the real structure and structure set properties or classes. It's just like a dumbed down version where it just has a couple of properties, and that's so that we can just launch it here using the debugger, as opposed to having to like open Eclipse, build it, run it, that sort of thing. So anyway, so in the code behind, if you drop down, I know it's hard to see, but over here, if you drop down, there's another file there, and it ends in, it's the views file name, but it ends in .cs. So it's a .xaml.cs file. And then in here, this is where you can put your logic. Well, when you're the benefit or the reason that you might want to use an MVVM structure where you have views, view models, and models is so that you can separate the three. So when you're as long as your bindings don't change in your view, then you can update your business logic, and you can update your your data objects as well, like your models, like your whatever models that you're creating or using or whatever. So it's just a way to decouple those. So if you were working on a team, or if you just only wanted to have to work on one thing, you could, whereas you don't have to make sure that, if I start changing things, if I start changing this view, this code behind view, let's see, where is it? If I start changing this, so this all relies on like naming, so like how I name the combo box. If I get rid of this combo box and make it like a, I don't know, like a, maybe I want to, I don't know, maybe make it like a list box, or like some check boxes or something, and I just like check which one I want. It's kind of probably a bad example, but for this use case, but let's say for whatever reason we wanted to change that. If I change that, then this is going to probably change. Like, I'm not going to really think about it. I'm just going to change it. And then now that's broken everything else, right? Whereas with the other stuff, if you're using binding, as long as you don't change your binding, then, which I guess in this case, as long as you don't change your name, but it's gonna change, because combo boxes have different properties than like a list box, right? Or like a list view. But so like one example would be like a DataGrid versus a list view. Well, they both have item sources. So as long as you don't change the binding for the item source, then you're good. But if you were to go from a DataGrid to a list view in this, it would probably take a lot more work. All right, so let's see. Okay, and let's see. So the benefit of using the code behind is that wiring up your buttons, all of that is relatively very easy. Like, you just create an event method. So and you can do that really easily in the view. If you just like double click the combo box, then it will create a method for you in the code behind, and then you can just add your logic into that. Whereas with the MVVM structure, you need to, there's some extra legwork that goes into wiring up your different buttons and things like that. So when you have a button, with using the MVVM, you're going to use something like an I command, or if you're using Prism, you're going to use like a delegate command. And then you also have to use some different methods. There's some that are built in, like you can use the INotifyPropertyChanged interface, and then with that comes the onPropertyChanged event or method that you fire off every single time there's like a change. And then with Prism, you do something similar, but your class inherits from a bindable base, and you use the set property method instead of the onPropertyChanged, and then the set property takes in some things, so it's just a little bit different. And the ease of using Prism comes in when you're trying to use like delegate commands. If you're only needing to update properties in a view, then using the built-in stuff is easy. And to be honest with you, using I command, which that should have a capital C, but using I command is, I just haven't taken the time to really like fully understand that. But there's some great videos. I think Singleton Sean, I think that's his name, or that's his channel. He has a great video on using I command and that sort of thing. But anyway, so with that, I've already gone over the view, and so I just want to kind of show some differences in like how you're gonna use that. So I just have in the application, I just have 2 examples of views, and I just have a method that will show whichever one that I want. So right now we're just showing the main view. and this is the one that uses binding. So in this one, we have our main view, and then we have a main view model. And when you are using a main view with a view with a view model, so the view model contains all of your logic, right? So it's going to contain all of the properties that will be used in the binding of the view. So for all of your elements in your view, the properties that go with them or that they're bound to come from your view model, and so you have to set your data context. Whereas with the code behind view, you don't need to set a data context because all of its logic exists inside that code behind, right? So with the main view, basically we have a grid set up, we have a small border with some corner radius, and then we have a grid, so a bunch of rows basically, and then in the first row it's the title, and then you can see we're binding to a title property, and we'll talk in a second about the need of backing fields, private backing fields with your property fields. And then in the second row we have the available structure sets, so then you'll select a structure set from that list. And then the third row we have the structure set ID, so this just populates whatever was selected here, just to show that, how you could update, things like that. So you just bind to the structure set ID. And so the structure set is actually a property, so it's actually an actual structure set model, so or like a structure set object, and then we're accessing that ID. So this is like a really good example of how you can access you can bind to a specific property of the object, right? And so then down here we have just a rectangle just for separating some stuff, and then we have in the next pertinent row we have the list of structures. So this is the combo box with the available structures that are in the structure set. So the idea is when this gets changed, the ID changes, the selected ID changes, and then also the available structures change, right? Because in each structure set you're going to have different structures. And then when you select a structure, then it's going to populate some information down here, right? And both views are exactly the same. So this is the code behind view, and this is our main view. Whoops. So this is our main view, and this is our code behind view. So you can see they're exactly the same. The only difference is in our code behind, instead of binding, we're setting a name property for the combo box, and then we access that name. We access this combo box in the code behind by just using this little property ID. So, but with our main view, we're using binding, and then down here you can see that we're binding to the selected structure. And then in this column, so this is just a stack panel, but you could very easily make this like a list view, and then just bind to the selected structure, and then each column would be like the property ID, the DICOM type, colors, or color, and volume, max dose, and mean dose. So, but anyway, so that will be displayed down here, and the logic that goes with the main view. So in the main view model, we have some private properties and we have some public properties. So down here we have our public properties. So when you need a when you need a property that's going to be updated within the view, right? So after the view, after it's already been set, if you need to update it, then you need to use something like INotifyPropertyChanged, but also you need a full property. So when you're creating your property, you might be used to using like prop, and then that's just going to create a basic property. But what you could do instead is if you type prop F or prop full tab, then you get it creates a public property with a private backing field. And so this is what you need in order to you need a private backing field in order to like update the view, update your property when you have properties that get updated in the view. Yes. So we just have a random, which is just for creating like random numbers. It's like a random number generator and random color generator. So we just use one instance, and then that's used when creating the structures and like the random stuff. And then we have a selected structure set ID, and with this selected structure set ID, we have a public property that is the selected structure set ID here. So we have a public property here, and when this is changed, so we change this, and when this gets changed, or when it gets set, this gets set, and then also this method is run, and then we also use the onPropertyChanged event, and that comes with the INotifyPropertyChanged. So in order to use this, what you need is you'll implement this interface. So you just add this at the top, and then this is going to be red. So once you bring in the system.component model, so both of these, this component model and then compiler services. So once you bring this in, once you add this, then you'll need to add this, and you can do that with control dot. So if I get rid of that, then control dot will show me that I need to use this system.component model. And then normally you wouldn't already have this, so if I comment this out, what's going to happen is this is still red, and so if I do control dot, it tells me that I need to implement the interface. And to do that, I need to create a public event property changed event handler called property changed. And so if you're not familiar with interfaces, what these are essentially contracts. And there's a really good video, I forget off the top of my head which channel it is, but anyway, there's a really good video on interfaces. If you just Google it, C#, you'll come across it, I'm sure. But anyway, so you can implement that, and what that's going to do is it's going to create this event. But we already have it, so I'm not going to worry about that. And then if you can just Google it, but I have the link here. So if I open this, this is where this comes from. So you implement the interface, and then you can just copy this, and that's basically what you need. But essentially, when you set your private value, your backing field, you need to call this method or this event. And so I guess it's a method. And all it's going to do is, if it's not null, it's going to invoke the property change event args, and it's going to pass in whatever the value is. And so you don't really have to worry about all of this. All you have to do is just, at least in 4.5 or 4.6 above, I think it's 4.5 and above, or I can't remember whatever version it is, but at some point you don't have to pass in the value anymore. So you can just call this method anytime you need to update something. So in our view, we have, like, we'll just start at the top. So we have the title, so it's bound to the title. So there's a method that says set title, and all that does is it just sets the title property. And the title property doesn't need a private backing field because it doesn't need to, it's not going to be updated. So once it's set, it's set. We don't need to update that later. And then the available structure set IDs, so those get set. So we're going to get the available structure set IDs from some dummy data. This is another class library that I'm referencing. It's just, again, it's just something simple. And so then that's going to set this property. Well, this property has a private backing field. No, it doesn't. Take it back, because we only need to update this once, right? So it also doesn't need a private backing field. And so this available structure set IDs is going to be set, and that's going to basically just going to populate this combo box. Now, where it gets fun is you also bind to the selected item. So you can bind to the item source, but you also need to bind to the selected item. So the selected item is bound to the selected structure set ID property. So if we go here, the selected structure set ID, this does have a backing field. So if I go, well, actually, we can go to references. I guess that's for the random, actually. So anyway, we'll just go down to here, and we see that when this property gets changed, so the selected structure set ID, when this gets changed, these two events are fired, or methods are called. So we're gonna raise the onPropertyChanged event to let the view know that there's been a change. But then we're also going to set the selected structure set. So because all this is just a string, right? So what it's going to do is it's going to go into the dummy data, and it's going to find the structure set that has the same name as this. And if it doesn't find that, it's going to pull like a default, whatever. But anyway, so then we have the structure set. Now when this is set, it's when this gets changed. Again, so for this we have a backing field, private backing field, and when the structure set gets changed, the private backing field gets updated here, and we notify the view, and we also get the structures. So you can do multiple things when you set this, whereas with just like a basic thing, so with a basic property, you just say get set or get private set or something like that, right? So we can change this to private, and we could say private set there if you wanted to, and then with a full field, you need a private backing field. But you can set like what you get, and you can set what happens when the value is set. So you can do a lot more. So if we wanted to do that up here, we would also need a private backing field. And then when your compiler actually, for every property that you set here, it will actually create, once it's compiled, it will actually create a private backing field for every single property, like public property that you have. But that it does that in the code behind. You don't need to worry about that. But anyway, so then we're going to get the structures, and if we look up here, when that happens, if the structure set's not null, then you set the structures property, okay, and that just gets the structures from the structure set, and it orders them. And then you set the selected structure, because remember, we're not only binding to the item's source, we're also binding to the selected item. So instead of making the user, once this is changed, instead of making the user then come down and select the first or whichever structure, we just go ahead and set what the first value is. And same thing with the structure set ID. If you remember, we set the item, the selected structure set ID, we set it as the first object or whatever, instead of forcing the user to make the first selection. At least I think we did. And then when the structures property is changed, let's see. The only thing that we do there is we just notify the view. And we do that so that, actually, I think this is necessary because it updates this information. I think if you don't have, I think you still have to update that. We could take that away and test it. But anyway, so to see it run, all we do is just hit start. Because again, it's pulling dummy data instead of, so yeah, so we don't automatically set this, but that, you know, you could very easily do that if you wanted to. So the user would select their structure set, and then it would populate. So as soon as you change that, you would populate all of this information, right? And if we change it again, then it's going to populate this. And then down here, you have a list of structures, and then you can change that. So that's just, it's really simple, right? So, but it's, you could kind of see how you might expand something like that to, you know, for whatever your needs are in your clinic or, you know, whatever. All right. So this is when the code is in the, like following more of like an MVVM structure. And then if we run the code behind view, then it's going to do the exact same thing, right? The only difference is all of the code is in the code behind, and we're actually setting properties that are in the, we're directly setting properties in the view, as opposed to setting a property that's unique to the view model and then updating the view, like letting the view know that it's been updated. So if that makes sense. So I think that's probably the biggest difference, is that when we're using the code behind, when we're putting all of our logic in the code behind the view, we're actually directly setting the values of the element that is in the view. Whereas with the main view, or when we're using binding, we're just binding to this property, and then anytime the property gets updated, we just have to know. So we just raise that onPropertyChanged event, right? Or method, onPropertyChanged method. Whereas here, we have to actually directly set it every single time. So in this case, if we look at our view, this is just an example. So if I double click this, it's going to create, well, it already existed, so it didn't create another one, but it would create this. You would get this blank event. So like if I comment this out, whoops, if I comment that out and go back to this view and I double click this again, then it will create one for me. And then you do whatever your logic is. So in this case, what happens is, we'll just start at the top. So we have, for private properties, we only have, well, we have basically the same private properties, but it's more so, it's not entirely necessary. It was just, I just kind of copied them over and then used them, like changed how I used them. But we set our random still. So this is the constructor for the view. So when this is initiated, then all of this is going to run. So it's going to initialize the view, and it's going, and then whatever else we put in here. So I'm setting the random, I'm setting the title, and I'm getting the available structure set IDs. This is all the same essentially in here. So when this constructor is called, we're setting all of that stuff as well. The difference is, the difference is in each of these things. So instead of setting the public like title property like we did in the other, we're setting the text box that is the text box in the view that is for the title. We're actually directly setting its text property, right? So that's the difference. We're directly interacting with the view, whereas the other way we're just kind of doing our thing with our logic, and then we just let the view know that it's been updated. And then, so that's setting the title, and then getting the available structure sets. This is different in that we still get the data, right? We don't need this. We could actually just set this as this, and that would be fine. Like you don't actually need this private field. The only reason that I kept it was because I already had them. Like I just copied them and that sort of thing. All right, so once we get them, we need to set the combo box's item source. I don't know what just happened. So we directly set the item source as this list of strings, okay? And then once that's done, that will populate. Okay, so that populates the combo box, and then the combo box selection, let's see, that's this one. So then this event is when once there's a change made in that combo box, it fires this selection changed event, and here we're going to set our selected structure set. So then in this is changed a little bit because we get the selected structure set ID from the combo box's selected item, and it's already a string, so we don't need to convert it to anything. And then we get our structure set from the dummy data, that we get the structure set that has the matching ID, and then which is the same basically as before, and then we're directly setting the text box's text property. So the selected structure set ID, that's here, this text box, whoops, I don't want to do that. So here, this selected structure set ID text box, we're directly setting its property, its text property. You can also directly set the font size, like all that stuff. Like if you wanted to change it to red to let the user know that it's been changed, or whatever, then you could. And then during this event, during this method, once that's selected, then we're also going to call the get structures method. So which will then just get the structures from the structure set, and then it's going to fill the combo box. It's going to set the combo box, the structures combo box, to set its item source to the structures, and then I'm going to select the first structure so that it will go ahead and populate the information. And then after that happens, then the set structure properties in view method gets called, and so the selected structure is like a structure, and so this combo box has structure objects in it, but it doesn't know that it needs to know what that is, so we cast it as a structure. The other thing that you might have seen is if you do something like this, right? So you're converting it to that. So if this doesn't work, you can try that. And then so now this object is a structure. So like if we get rid of this, it doesn't know it's just an object. So if you can't really see, but it just says object here. But if we change it to as structure, now it knows that it's a structure. And all right, so then this object has an ID property, a color property, a DICOM type, like all these different properties. And again, this is using the dummy data. So because obviously mean dose, that comes from the DVH, not the actual structure property. It's not a property of the actual structure. It's from the DVH of the structure, or a DVH data where you pass in the structure or whatever. So that would be a little different for, like, you know, use in Eclipse, but it's essentially, you know, you can imagine it's essentially the same, or it's like along the same process. So, but here we're having to directly set each of these values. So we have the text, the fill for the structure color. So instead of binding the fill to this property that we did in the other, so like if we go down here, we're just binding the ellipses fill property to that color, whereas here we have to set it. So we just give this ellipse a name, and then we set the fill property, which is what we're doing here. And then same thing for the structure ID, the text. So this is just an example. You can set other things as well. And so that's pretty much it. But I mean, obviously it works. The result is the same, and you only have basically a single file instead of having to set your view into the other. So like it's still going to do the same thing. And if we just double check, yeah, so we're showing the code behind, which is the code behind view, right? So anyway, so it's going to do the same thing. And so there's really, you know, it's kind of up to you as far as like which way you want to go. But just at the end here, this is where it really starts to get easier or more fun. So like, let's say we wanted to set a data grid with the structures information, right? So instead of doing it this way, like let's say we just wanted to view a data grid, okay? And we can't see it yet, but yeah, so it's in row 5, so that's good. And so we'll just get rid of that, or just shrink that down. So now, and then also let's change this back to this. All right, and all we did, so it's not going to be pretty or anything like that, but all we did is we bound this item source to the structures, which is just the list of structures from the structure set. And then it's going to actually create a column for each of because we're not specifying which columns to create, it's going to create a column for each property. So instead of us having to hard code all of that information, and you could imagine or before we were just doing it for one structure, but now we're just showing all the structures. So hopefully this is where you're wanting to go. Like if you're just selecting one item, like it's not really that big of a deal. But if you want to view a bunch of things without a lot of work, then, you know, you could do that. And there's probably a way we could do this in the other as well. I think we would probably just create a data grid and then set the item source to structures in the code behind. So there's probably a very easy way to do that as well. But this gets fun because you can create like a data template for your data grid, and then you can create, there's just all kinds of things that you can do. You can have a column with like a combo box, and so like if you wanted to select something, like to change a property of one of your, like let's say you wanted to change the color of a structure, right? So like in version 16 you can set some different properties, right? Or let's say you wanted to change the ID of the structure, then you could. You could, instead of using a text block, you could use a text box that can be edited, and then allow the user to change the name, and then you could change everything all at once instead of having to go to the structure's properties, change it, click apply, click on the next structure, click apply, like make your change, whatever. And then you could do that same thing for structures. Or if you had, like if you had instead of using like a structure set template, if you wanted to just update everything based on what you have from like maybe a spreadsheet or something like that, then you could do that as well. And you could do that, fairly easily. And again, you could probably do that with using the code behind. And there's nothing really wrong with doing this. It's just a preference. So some people prefer to have things separated and some people don't. Because honestly, using the code behind it, I don't want to say it's easier. Some things are easier. You can directly, set these values. But when things start to grow, like if your project starts to get big, then managing all of this can get difficult. And then also remembering like, what you need to set when an event happens. Like, that it can have its own challenges, right? So there's challenges that come with each one. The biggest challenges for me when you're trying to use like an MVVM structure is understanding this, or like actually for me, the button events, that's the more difficult thing. So again, I just haven't taken the time to really fully understand how to use the iCommand interface and everything, but Prism makes everything really easy for that. So anyway, I hope that this was helpful, and if you have any ideas or suggestions, let me know, and hope you have a great day.